Hello.
All right, and welcome back to the Semi-Occasional Gaming Podcast. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Paul. G'day, mate.
John, how you going? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I'm glad to have you in. And today we're going to be discussing a bit of a different topic. I thought we'd talk a little bit about CRT televisions, given that we're both heavily in the retro scene. But before we get into that, why don't you give us a little intro on who you are and what you've been up to and your gaming journey.
Thanks, John. My gaming journey has been pretty mixed. I would sort of consider that I'm probably a 70-30 ratio between retro and modern gaming. Part of that's mainly due just to time restraints more than anything else, and the idea of being able to sit on the couch with a AAA title on a last gen, because that's what I've still got, just isn't feasible anymore with family life, work, and everything in between. So I guess a lot of those retro games tend to offer that 15 to 30 minute itch getting scratched, and that's been where a lot of my attraction is, particularly the arcade games, your beat 'em ups, your run and guns and that sort of thing. Although I did purchase a Switch in March of this year, but have mostly been playing sort of drop in, drop out games on it rather than your Zeldas and your other sort of 60 to 100 hour RPGs and story based single player games. So yeah, 70-30 is my split.
And that's 70,
and I guess that's
70 retro, obviously, yeah?
Yeah. And I guess that's where the CRTs come into play, which we'll dig into a bit as the time together goes on.
It's funny you say that because I'm probably 70-30 the other way, actually. So I'm much more passionate about retro, but I find that retro is more of a time drainer just because of practicality. Whereas my Switch is always on me, my PS5 is always plugged in. So yeah, a little bit of opposites going on there.
I think that's a very good segue into the topic we're talking about. If you're covering off connectivity and accessibility,
definitely. Well,
I guess.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, so, when we're talking about retro in particular, obviously CRT TVs come up a lot. It seems to be a very big topic, and I wanted to get you on because we've had a few chats about CRTs in the past, and I've always gone to you for advice and check this thing out on Marketplace. Tell me what you think, and you've had quite a few cool units in a short amount of time. So I thought, I'll get you on, and we'll have a bit of a chat about it.
So I guess the disclaimer, and I certainly hope this is going to be in the little description for wherever this is posted on whichever streaming app or anything, is I'm in no way an expert in this field. There are some phenomenal individuals and groups out there that do everything from modding through to resto on these sorts of what are sometimes very, very old pieces of technology. My, I guess, experience comes from that within a relatively short space of time, I've covered the full gambit through, entry-level consumer sets through to the most sort of high end that you could go without spending like a stupid amount of money, because I'm still, level-headed when it comes to financial investment into this particular hobby. But there's people out there that just spend, thousands of dollars on some of these really sort of sought after to sets, and again, you're dealing with something that's decades old and could break down at any given time. So I guess that's my approach to why I haven't gone full ball into it. But yeah, I guess my journey started with me sort of having that interest in playing on CRTs. I worked in retail between 03 and 05, which was the heyday, the last hurrah of CRTs, where there was a lot of the high def, your 86 centimeter, 110 kilo Sonys, the widescreens. And we won't talk model numbers, John. I think that's probably somewhere. We might drop a few here and there, but otherwise it just sound like we're talking a different dialect. But I think the Sony Wega models, the ones that did sort of high def,
the
and that sort of
widescreens,
thing.
are they? Yeah, yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was parallel running to when plasmas were just starting to come out, but there was only sort of Fujitsu's and Pioneers on the market at that stage, and you're spending 7 grand for a panel that you'd have to buy a stand for, you'd have to buy speakers for, you'd have to buy a set-top box because there was no tuner in them. So it
Yeah.
was still an era when CRTs were very attractive to people that wanted reliability, and when they didn't know the tech around plasma, and LCDs just look like, average computer monitors back then. They didn't really look like they do today.
Do you work at like Harvey Norman or something, or?
It was David Jones. So
Okay, yeah,
yeah, we I was lucky in a sense that we had a lot of pretty high end
yeah,
products, but we also had the clients that would come in and buy them, invest the time in talking about it. So it wasn't really like a retail job in the way that it is now. This is before smartphones, where people weren't as well researched or didn't have the
of
ability to
course.
walk through a store and look at their phone. They actually have to have a conversation with you. So it was almost sort of consultancy to a degree. So I was very lucky because I've got to play with a lot of them. So my interest in getting back into CRT started about 3 years ago. And it was initially to try and snag a TV that I bought new, which was just a 51 centimeter flat Sony Trinitron. And I will
Hang
drop the
on,
model number for that.
hang on. You bought new. You mean you bought new back in the day?
Yeah, I bought it when I was working at David
Okay.
Jones. I was like, it was like $450. And it was a KVAR 21M30, and that was a set that had a better quality of input, and we'll run through the inputs at some point if we
Yeah, yep.
circle back to it. But it basically allowed you to, at that time, put a DVD player into it, which was primarily what I was using it for. And my knowledge of what these TVs were capable for games, like a lot of people getting back into CRTs now, certainly wasn't what it was
Yeah,
back
we're
then.
all kicking ourselves now, aren't we?
Yeah, and you run everything through the aerial plug or the red, white, and yellows. Basically, no one
Yep,
really sort
yep.
of went up from there. And then it was initially like most people start off with just Facebook Marketplace,
Yep.
and I found someone in the CBD that had just a 34 centimeter flat Sony that I picked up for free. So I drove out there and snagged it and brought it back. So no remote, just the basic input, and plugged my NES and Mega Drive into it, and it was nice. It looked pretty average. It had a lot of rain, I guess, those sort of, staticky sort of effect to it. It wasn't a very crisp image, but it was just nice. And
Yeah.
that sort of had enough of a lead in for me to start looking at other sets. And shortly after, I got a TIAC that was 34 centimeters that had SCART in the back of it. And for those that might not be aware of it, SCART sort of that sought after connection for what is an RGB signal, which is probably the best signal for an analog gaming if your console supports it or outputs it. And after a whole lot of mucking around, I found out that SCART was not RGB SCART, it was composite SCART. So it was just basically like the Sony I had. So
Yeah, okay. Might just back up a bit for a second. I do want to get into the different inputs, and particularly SCART, because that's something I'm actually not too familiar with, or I don't know a lot about. But just for the uninitiated, I guess, why do we like CRTs? What's the what's the big deal?
it really varies based on the individual. Some like the aesthetic properties of them, particularly when you look at companies like Bang& Olufsen and Luva, who make sets that are designed to be in a living room and look good even when they're switched off. So there's an art piece sort of vibe to them. Others like the industrious look of those sorts of TVs, particularly when you get into pro monitors and broadcast monitors, which we can talk about at some point. Others like the glow that a CRT gives off. There's I guess a nostalgia factor to what they recall sitting up close to in their childhood, or having a version of in a holiday home or a parent's house or something like that, or their own home. So I think you could talk to 10 different people and they'd give 10 different answers as to what they like about CRTs. The other thing that you
I think though that the probably the main answer you'll get though, or a very common answer is for particularly gaming, retro gaming, they just look better compared to.
yeah, that,
And then you compare. Comparing it to a high definition monitor,
yeah,
and that's primarily because of the the pixels. These games back then weren't designed to be pixelated. So
Yeah, absolutely.
you plug your NES or your Super Nintendo into a HD TV, and you see all everything pixel perfect. But back then, the developers didn't create the sprites and the levels and all the graphics with the intent of seeing pixel perfect. So there was an intention to have, I guess, that artifact and that imperfection, which actually kind of smoothed out the image. And there's some, if you just Google CRT versus high definition on Google, you'll see some good comparisons of, probably the best one that comes up is the waterfall from Sonic the Hedgehog. If you look at it on a high definition monitor, the waterfall comes up in lines, but on a CRT, it's smoothed out, and it just looks like a curtain.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many products out there that you can get for cheap where you chuck an analog input into it and it spits out a HDMI one. You can get ones that basically just convert the signal for the sake of it, and that's where a lot of people start. And then you can get upscalers, which sort of clean up the image and, bump the resolution up, and you're getting into, hundreds of dollars for those sorts of things. And I guess it really depends on what you want. You got to have the space for it as well, John. I think that's another factor that people forget.
Absolutely.
And I think the market currently at 34 centimeters or 14-inch for those that use that unit of measurement. Those are the ones that are pretty much the most sought after. I know a lot of people that attend sort of tournaments, whether they're sort of Smash Brothers tournaments and things like that. It's not my scene, but people that I've sold CRTs to have given me various reasons why they've wanted them for. People use them for art installations and backdrops, or someone might be doing set dressing and they want a TV that's era specific. But I guess bringing it back to your question about why people like them is there's that ease of use where you're able to pair the product with its intended output. You're not having to insert some sort of conduit between the two to marry up something that it's not designed for, which is what you went into detail about just before.
And that's what I like. That's why I want a decent CRT, because I see all these upscalers and frame masters and things like this, and to me it just seems like such a head fuck, and I don't want to learn all that stuff. It's just way too much for me.
I had a RGB modded NES that I sold recently, and the gentleman that bought it from me had a collection of consoles all feeding up into an OLED through a RetroTink 4X, I think he said it was, or 5X, whatever the latest one is before the 4K one that they've just announced is. And that's, he said he'd been tempted to get back into CRTs, but it's just the practicality of having the space for it and moving it around and that sort of thing. And, unless you've got a dedicated game room, I think, or a, man cave, whatever sort of term you want to give to it, you can find it sort of hard to have a living room that could have both a flat panel and a CRT next to it without it sort of being
and we all used to have them.
displeasing.
We all used to have them, but times have changed, and I definitely don't want big ugly thing sticking out in my living room and just taking up a corner of the house. So I can totally get it.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Like there's some sets there that are absolutely god awful ugly, and there's people that swear by them being the most aesthetically pleasing. So you just never know until you get into it. And there's when you're talking about CRTs, you've got your fans and clicks for certain brands and why, and you've got shadow mask tubes, and then you've got the Sonys which have the Trinitrons and that sort of thing, and then you've got all the people that refuse to go with anything but European sets, and the Grundigs and the Lurvers and Bang & Olufsen and all that sort of thing. So it's like any hobby, you go down the rabbit hole, and it really depends on what depth you're comfortable with. You can really go past that point of consumer into professional, and then the rabbit hole just gets longer and longer and harder and harder at certain points.
Well, Sony Trinitron seems to be the one that most people gravitate to. I know you mentioned a few of the other European brands like Grundig, and I can't remember the one that starts with L. Lurver, yep. That they're sort of the higher end consumer ones, I guess. But Trinitron seems to be like that's like the gold standard, basically.
Yeah, I think most people that like Sony's generally stick to them. Sony's obviously got a very strong brand presence across pretty much everything that they make. Some better things than others. But I think for me, the reason why I chose that 34 as my first entrance back into CRTs again is because the last CRT that I owned in which I got rid of, I think, in 2006, was that 51 centimeter Trinitron flat screen. So that was my link back to it. So I think a lot of people they just go with what they're used to, or with things like the CRT gaming subreddit, and there's a phenomenal My Life in Gaming YouTube video I think from 2015 that still has a significant amount of relevance even today when talking about like consumer sets, pro video monitors, and things like that, which is a great resource if anyone listening has not seen that video yet. Yeah, it really depends, John. I think for a lot of people, it's opportunistic if they want a CRT and there's one close to them. Just grab whatever you can get. Obviously, within your budget and your time and your space requirements, and then often that might be the last one you get, or it might be the start of a 10-year obsession, or in my case, sort of 3 very intense years of ducking around and testing and trying and buying and selling and ending up where I've ended up.
And then, of course, you got the people that try and flog these things off for big bucks. They see the word Trinitron and they go, "Oh, $500," and it's something you can sort of pick up on the side of the road if you're lucky.
Yeah, we could almost start a separate sort of segment in each of your podcasts, regardless of sort of thematic topics that you'd normally be raising, which is just like what's ridiculous on Marketplace right now. And there's stuff on there at the moment that are, I think people seem to think that because they've got a 68 centimeter Sony that's in decent condition, they can ask $500-$600 for it, when really you're basically giving someone a potential trip to the chiropractor with having to move something like that around, or it might still be something that fails at a certain point because those big TVs were the main living room TVs for a lot of people, so they've been thrashed to the umpteenth degree. Whereas you go those smaller ones and they may have been the second bedroom
one, right?
TV, or the holiday house TV where they were only there during summer and those sorts of things.
That's a really good point. I never actually considered that.
Yeah. So I consider it from time to time, but it's mainly the size factor. The biggest CRT that I've ever had was a Bang & Olufsen MX 4500, and that was a 66 centimeter set, which was 40 something kilos. And I remember getting that from Doncaster and lifting it into the car with the help of the gentleman who I picked it up from, and then getting it home. And I'm like, okay, well, this is all me now. And it's not that I'm not a strong person, but it's I guess the cumbersome nature of moving them that can really do some damage. And
it's a very awkward thing to carry because of the shut, because it's heavy on one side and everything. So.
But I ended up lifting it from the boot of my car onto an office chair and then rolling the office chair through the garage into the house. And anyone that wants to sort of stay in CRTs for long enough, I'd suggest going to Bunnings and buying a dolly because keeping it on a dolly, if it's something that you're only wheeling out periodically, and I have to give a shout out to Marco of Marco Retro, a great YouTube channel you should give a follow to. He got me onto the idea of any CRTs in storage having them on dollies, because even if you're only moving them around to get to other CRTs, then it's definitely something that you're not, again, having to have that potential Medicare rebate for a chiro, osteo, or acupuncture, whatever it might be, that you end up ruining yourself over.
I once drove past a CRT at the front of someone's house, hard rubbish, and it was I can't remember what size it was. It was actually a shit brand, I can't remember, but it was fairly big. It would have been at least 50, close to maybe 60 centimeters. I can't remember. But I knocked on the person's door and I said, "Do you mind if I take this TV?" She goes, "Yeah, no worries." So sweet. So I went home and I got a 2-wheeler trolley, and I wheeled it to my car, and it was just way too big and heavy for me to carry it into the boot, and then I was stuck. And I was just sitting on the side. I was sitting in my boot, and I was just sort of like rubbing my eyes and my head, going, "Fuck, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And then some guy walked past, and he saw that I was clearly distressed, he offered to help me lift the TV. So thanks to
I
that
think
random stranger.
there's I think there's 76 centimeter wide screens that you see pop up now and again, and the 80 centimeter 4:3, so the square ratio aspect ratio ones. They're the ones that, you know, it'd be nice in theory, particularly for light gun games, like the idea of playing like
Oh yeah,
point blank or something like
absolutely.
that. Yeah, that would be phenomenal. And then you just think of the practicality of like, where's it going to go? Obviously, something that large when all the electronics inside are running, there might be a noticeable smell coming out of it. You know,
Yes.
everything's dramatized the higher up you go in sizes with these things. So there's more to clean. There's, you know, if it's going to get scuffed up, something bigger is generally going to have more visible scuff marks and stuff like that. You've got more visible area of the screen that could have nicks and chips and things like that in it. So I think 34 and 51 is probably the sweet spot for a lot of people, but
Yeah.
you know, 68's, if you are wanting one and you do have the space for it, you can probably get that for a pretty reasonable price just because no one wants to take on the burden of it, basically.
Yeah.
And that includes
Exactly.
the transport story that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I do have a couple of, I think, 51 centimeter Trinitrons in my garage, and I'm still yet to put the test pattern on and calibrate them, and I'll keep one and get rid of the other. But even they're a bit too big. I want to, yeah, like you said, go down to 34 centimeters, and that will fit nicely on my desk. And yeah, have a couple of consoles underneath. But
Interesting. You talk about if you're talking about test patterns, I think that's a good sort of segue into how you can actually tell that you've got a good set or not.
yeah,
I guess each CRT or most CRTs will have a service menu, which is what a technician would use to fix if there was any problems with it, and that those service menus are generally accessed by,
by
you
the
know,
remote.
yeah, and a unique button combination, so
Yeah.
nothing that you could accidentally press as a day-to-day user of the TV. So you need to, you know, hold this, press that, put that code in. You know, I probably got that wrong, and there's people listening that are probably screaming into their
Oh,
AirPods.
you can push the volume up, and you can, yeah, whatever.
So, but no, like the main point is they were never designed for, I guess, public consumption and
Yeah.
use. So the whole idea is that people now have access to them, and they've wrecked their TVs. I mean, the equivalent of like bricking the TV basically by
Oh, really?
not using the service menu correctly to the point that they've, you know, made changes to the positioning of the TV that they can't get back again, and all sorts of other horror
But
stories and things like that.
you can put it back though, right?
To a degree, but there's
But
a
can you do
yeah.
damage? Can you do damage by doing
Well,
this sort of thing?
I'm lucky in a sense that I'm that sort of boring that I haven't had to do that to
Haven't
that degree, or
tried.
I've had people do it for me when TVs have needed fixing. So
Yeah.
I haven't had to, but I know of someone that I sold a pro monitor to that was, you know, replacing a different pro monitor, so they thought they knew what they were doing, but their old pro monitor was one from a Commodore, whereas this was a Sony professional video monitor, and they, I guess, tried to have the same gusto in doing that on it, and then asked me about it, and I said, "Here's the service manual. Go for your life. I don't want to muck around with that." But I guess the test pattern, it's there's a test suite, if you want to sort of talk about it, which is the 240p test suite. And it's very, very well known. And basically, you're able to run through the background. One of the test patterns is the background from Sonic, which just runs through the first level, so you can sort of pick up color and where the color may drop or change, or dulling, if there's any sort of color imperfections, if there's any sort of warping of the image, that sort of thing. There's a myriad of different terms I
Yeah.
could use to talk about the technicalities, but I won't. But
I
it's basically picking up on things that show that the TV is sort of not, you know, working as it ordinarily should.
I've not seen the Sonic one.
Yeah, it's
That's
just
new.
whatever the first zone is, it's just basically that background only running. Most common one that you'll see on any sort of, I mean, CRT gaming, the subreddit is pretty good for that. When people sort of talk about their new pickups, they'll usually flash up the test pattern to show off
Yeah.
how good the the convergence is, and everyone goes, "Ooh, wow, that's pretty spot on." But even
And
it's basically just a grid pattern that runs over
that's
the
it, the
TV.
grid. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can sort of see where the corners start and finish.
Yeah. And we're
But even
talking
when you're looking,
geometry and bending and color and things like that.
exactly, and even when you're looking at the lines of the boxes, do those lines stay sharp or do they bleed into sort of other areas and things like that? So yeah, the test pattern's a really good way of, you could be ignorant and not do that and just be happy with your TV, which is what a lot of people, monitor, should I say, which a lot of people very are. And listeners can't see, but John just, energetically pointed to himself. But for a lot of people, they want to go that deep into it and be really happy with it, particularly if they're in an area where there's a lot of used CRTs that they can, if they don't like one, they can always acquire another
Yeah,
one.
exactly.
Whereas certain areas, it's a bit of a hen's tooth sort of situation. You just be happy with what you can get.
And that's what I'm planning to do. Is you sent me some links to I could download a test suite for a PlayStation ROM, burn that to
That's
a
right.
disc, and then chuck my PlayStation in, hook it up to the TV, and do it that way. Because generally, most people use something like an EverDrive or like yourself, like a Mister, and run the ROM that way. But I have no such EverDrive or Mister myself, so.
Yeah, it
But I
was an
can.
interesting journey for that because I don't think I'd ever recalled anybody doing the test suite on a PS1. I think most commonly it's like a 16-bit sort of thing or
Well,
an
yeah,
8-bit.
I tend to overcomplicate things. Well, what about now we've covered sort of consumer stuff. Now, what about PVMs and BVMs? You mentioned professional video monitor a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah. So look, I won't reinvent the wheel on this because
No.
there's like an absolute ton of information about these things. I'll probably give a
Well,
sort of contextual explanation into my jump between consumer sets and PVMs.
what's a PVM?
Okay, all right. So PVM is Sony's version of it, but the problem is, so it's professional video monitors. So they're traditionally used in broadcast television as a set to be a reference and color correction for the monitors, sort of for the cameras rather, that were being used. So broadcast television, film production, that sort of thing. Less common applications, but still relevant, would have been in the medical industry, hooked up to
Surgery.
equipment in
Yep.
hospitals, yeah, that sort of thing. Monitor in the very traditional sense. And then I think the sort of entry level professional use ones would be your closed circuit television, so CCTV, the security, that sort of thing. So CCTV ones, you can get ones that are purely black and white. But the most common thing between all of them is the higher grade tubes in them. So phosphors that are in the, that are sort of with the sets are of a higher quality. Sony's PVMs, I guess the sort of the myth or the understanding is that when they were coming off the production line, those tubes that had a higher sort of quality to them, they'd then allocate to their PVM product. So it's not like there was a PVM tube being manufactured in a consumer tube. Again, I'm not an expert. Don't come after me. I'm not going to put any of my social media links here because I don't care on what your views are. This is just what I've heard with discussing with other hobbyists. But it's interesting to sort of understand the differentiation between consumer and professional. And that's the same with anything. If you're talking like audio as well, there's a big sort of difference between what makes a consumer audio product and what makes a professional grade audio product.
Wait, so say that again. So you're saying that the tubes that they were producing for the consumer models, any high end ones, they would just chuck in the PVMs. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
if there was a tube, I mean, there'd be some tubes that would be made for very specific use, but there are some models of PVMs and even the BVMs which they were made for the consumer market, and then the higher quality versions of those tubes would be
Oh, right.
allocated
Yep.
out for
Yep.
that sort of thing. So
Okay.
again, go do your googling, go do your Reddit deep dives, confirm or deny what I've just said. I really don't care, but that's just sort of an interesting little thing that has come up
Yep.
in conversations with other hobbyists. But PVM is the Sony name for it, but everyone's just become so comfortable with that they apply it to sort of any pro monitor. But there's Panasonic have got their versions of it, JVC have got their versions of it. There are companies that have made professional monitors. The entry level ones are generally going to be your CCTV use ones, lower TVL, which is television lines. So that's, I guess, that version of resolution. So for like if you're looking at a 9-inch PVM, which is that, something like a desktop monitor, which was my first PVM that I got in 2021. That was a 450 line PVM, which is the sort of the highest line count you can get for a PVM of that size. But then that same series of 9-inch monitors then drops down to 250 for more
Right. Yep.
CCTV use. So you could get a monitor that is 34 centimeters, but you could get ones which has the same sort of definition as a consumer level TV. It's just for professional use because one of the things I forgot to mention when I first introduced this part is that they're all designed to be left on for pretty much non-stop.
Yep.
So, the problem with getting one on the second-hand market is you're
Hasn't
going to
been
really
on for 50,000 hours. Yeah.
yeah, and you're going to know that because you're going to have potentially the ABC logo test pattern burnt into the back of it, or
Yes.
if it was used in CCTV, a time code to some degree, or at least the box that shows the time code, with a blur, because obviously the numbers change and things like that.
And is BVM? What's the difference BVM versus PVM?
So BVM is broadcast video monitor. So again, this is a Sony terminology
So
or
it's just
sort of product name.
okay, just different name for the same thing, basically.
Yeah, but purely used
For
in.
broadcast. Yep.
Yeah, so those were the ones that were. I mean, these are things that were never available for. You couldn't go into a retail store and buy these. These were sort of corporate catalogs that were shopped around the various industries, and people would order them that way.
And these things aren't in circulation anymore. Everything's gone to digital now. So
Yeah,
so
you hear all these stories about
the
I've
ABC headquarters had a whole warehouse just sitting collecting dust at some point, right?
Yeah, and I had a conversation with someone in government a couple of years ago that when they heard that I was into these sorts of things was mentioning that, oh, there's a room in Canberra under Parliament House that's got stuff in there. I'm like, oh, you just sort of think where these things are. But you talk to anyone that's been in the industry, any of those industries that use these products, and they've all got stories about a mass exodus and recycling bins full of them and those sorts of things. But that's just the way it was. No one knew, I guess, they would have this level of interest, or I guess probably a small group knew, but not to the extent that knows now.
Yeah, of course.
That would want to covet them that like they do now. So it's really interesting to see how it's done a bit of a 180 between everyone turfing them to go to LCDs and OLEDs now, which is far more practical for the industry use. But there's this undercurrent of hobbyists and niche interest people, and I mean, even if you're not a gamer, people that collect like old technology or something that's very era specific, it's going to be of interest for them to track one down in good nick that's able to be used.
Yeah, 100%. It's like anything really. There's always going to be a niche market for it, and then you've also got your your Gumtree and your Facebook scumbags that are hoarding them and trying to flip them for a profit, which I mentioned before. It's a shame, but anyway. So you've acquired a few high-end PVMs in recent times. Do you want to take us through how you came across them, and then I think you may have done some mods to one of them. Is that right, or
not mods? No.
No?
I'll sort of set it out a bit more.
Keep it like high level. Don't have to go.
Yeah.
Don't have to
no,
go,
you're not going to get the this is your life.
It.
As you see it, but no, look, after I had my sort of dabbling in consumer sets enough to know that there were sort of pro ones out there, the sort of curiosity got the better of me. And after having that 9-inch one, and even at that size, being really impressed with not just the picture, but also that really like industrious look. So if you're wanting to Google, it's PVM 9044QM. So they look, they've got a handle on the top. They were designed to be in a broadcast van or out in the field sort of thing. So they had a battery pack in the back, sort of thing. And that has the RGB input and component input, which is that higher quality input for a console that supports it. And I didn't have any consoles that outputted to that. So I had my NES RGB modded. And then after I saw that difference, I was like, okay, yeah, I can understand why this is, I guess, sort of the benchmark now that I want to play at for what I've got for the time that I do have to play at. And after I had the 9-inch, I started looking around at 14-inch PVMs and spent like a fair amount of time looking around. Because if you want one that's decent, because when you jump to 14-inch, you're getting into 500 to 800 line count, so TVL, so like a really high, like super sharp, very crisp, lots of scan lines, that sort of thing. And it's 4 figures and above for a lot of those sorts of things. And then just randomly on Marketplace, there was someone selling one called an N6A, which is a 500, I believe, TV line count, 14-inch one. Mono speakers, that's the other thing about these things, because they were for
Yeah,
industrial
that
use,
crap sound. Yeah,
commercial use. No one cared about the sound, so
yeah.
they're all mono speakers. So I drove out there, and the guy had gotten it in a bunch of audio equipment. This guy was a big audio collector, so beautiful amps with the vacuum tubes and a
Yep,
lot of
yep.
disassembled pinball machines in his garage I had to walk through. And he had this monitor sitting there that looked brand new. And he said he'd owned it for about 2 years and only used it for about 30 minutes because he had better sets. And it was owned by a company that was hired to do media for either the Commonwealth Games or the Olympics or something like that. And then that was it. It was only used for that campaign and then never used again. So I sort of lucked out with that.
What'd you pay for it?
I think it was $400.
So you must have
Yeah.
been like the first minute. You must have been the first one in.
I don't know. I think he was out, sort of out in the sticks, out in the sort of southeast, out towards the
Yeah, okay.
Dandenongs. So, but I mean, I guess sort of a bit of background. Like, I don't throw money at these things. I generally use my gaming stuff like an ATM. There's things that I have that I don't have an emotional connection to. So if I'm wanting to purchase something that's akin to that hobby and interest, I'll generally sort of sell one thing and then go from that way.
Yeah,
I
that's a
guess,
good way to do
you know,
it. Yep.
morally, I feel a little bit better about it when I'm getting these things. So I drove out there, got it, tested it, and then brought it home and was absolutely stoked. So I ended up getting a pair of Behringer like monitors, so speakers to go with it. Make sure if you are going to buy speakers for your CRT, you get something that's shielded so it doesn't give a purpling sort of imperfection to the screen because of that sort of magnetism that happens with those speakers,
Okay.
some speakers. And really enjoyed that, got a lot of enjoyment out of it. And then a mate of mine, so he had the 14-inch of the 9-inch that I had, which was an 800 TV line, basically the highest resolution monitor that Sony made at a PVM level at that size without jumping up to a broadcast video monitor, and did that one for me for mates rates. So I ended up selling the N6A for a little bit more than I purchased it for, and then that money just went into the other monitor, and then I kept that for a while, and then sold that monitor off to someone, and then ended up having a 20-inch BVM for a bit. And then when I realized I wasn't using it, and I had a arcade machine that I'd acquired, and my apartment was filled with screens, and it wasn't very zen, and wasn't the end game that I was looking at. I ended up selling that, and
Was that
then
the JVC?
no, it was a Sony. So that was one of the broadcast video monitors before the D series, which is the ones that do up to 1080i input.
Really?
So there are ones there that do so D. Yeah, and there's ones that do up to 1,000 TV lines. So
Wow.
just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But you're looking at $3,000-4,000 for those sorts of ones, and they're multi-format in the sense that they don't just do 240p, they do 480 and that sort of thing. So
Yeah, okay.
I guess I like the idea of having one, but using it enough to justify having it when it takes up the amount of space, and there's obviously that ticking clock on it where something
Yeah.
could go wrong with it, and there's only a small niche amount of people that can fix these things. I decided that selling it was in my best interest, and in its place I have a very large fish tank now, so I've gone from one hobby to another with the space that was being taken
How
up
many
by
lines
it.
does the fish tank have?
Oh, it's 130 litres, so I guess you do the math on that, John. I'm sure there's a water to scanline ratio that can be equated to.
Yeah, there's a subreddit for that.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I one of the other catalysts was me getting a candy cab, an arcade machine, and having that, which has a CRT in it, and that was a 59 centimeter. And then I, to this day, at the current time of recording this, do not have a single CRT. Now I've gone.
Really?
Yeah. I got the 9-inch one was both my first and my last one that I
Wow.
owned, and I sold that off to a great bloke who was keen for something for his desk as a bit of a sort of test unit to use. And now I don't own any CRTs, but the itch is there, John. The itch is
Yeah.
certainly there. So I guess
So-
watch this space if we do another episode.
So your Mister and your, do you still have your analog NT, super analog NT?
No, I don't have that anymore. So I got the Super NT after I got into CRTs.
Yep.
So I was never, because I guess the mini NES and the mini SNES, when you hack those, it's,
Yeah.
yeah, people can argue about, emulation this and FPGA that and all that sort of thing. It's good enough. Like it's good enough. There's some
Oh.
slowdown on some of the games and the audio sounds a bit different. But if you're just a casual gamer, they're phenomenal
Mm.
units, those mini NESs and mini SNESs when they're hacked. And then I got the Mister in when I realized that I didn't want to have every console. I had a Mister FPGA unit built for me in Christmas of 2022. No, 2021. 2021.
So that's just hooked up to HDMI now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's in a drawer at the moment.
Oh yeah.
But if I do want to do anything, I'll dig it out and sort of put anything on there. So mainly arcade stuff.
Yeah.
But again, sort of going back to the beginning of the episode where I was talking about where my time goes. It's just really that.
So actually, I just got a question about the Mister. So it's FPGA, which is not emulation. It's almost the real deal in terms
So
of
it's a
hardware.
Yeah, so it's a FPGA stands for Field Programmable Gate Array, and it was basically I guess, how do you sort of talk about it? It's like a similar to a Raspberry Pi in a sense that it's like a computer. You can probably hear my cat that's just come to join the podcast.
That's
Good
all
on
right.
him.
Yeah.
It's basically like a hobbyist tool. Like it's a you can program it however you want. So what people have learned is that they can convert the chips that although I'm getting into territory now that I'm definitely not educated enough to be able to confidently speak on, which you can probably tell in how I'm delivering this response. But basically, you can mimic the processing of a console
As
on
opposed to the software.
exactly. So
Yep.
you're taking it down to like a hardware language, and then you're feeding that into the FPGA, and then it spits out what it is. So something like those analog products, that is a singular system on their very high end, fancy looking products that they make, whether
Yep.
it's the Pocket for something handheld or the 16-bit or the 8-bit stuff that they've released previously. Whereas the Mister is really an all in one. So whether you want the arcades where it's called a core basically. So
Right. Yep. Yep.
every arcade game is its own core because those were on PCBs. Each arcade game was on its own PCB.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Whereas the consoles themselves are all their own cores, and then you've got all the old computers from 486 and a bunch of other ones
So
that are on there as
so
well.
your Mister has a bunch of cores on there that was pre-built for you. Is that right?
The it has an SD card, a micro SD card on it, and that's the image that you put onto it. So the if you're going to go buy one pre-done or whether you're going to build your own, you've always got to image it to do it. And it's an amazing community, but basically there's a script that you run off the main menu that updates it. So at the moment, the big news is there's a Nintendo 64
Yeah, I saw
core.
that. Yep.
I haven't updated mine yet because it's still in, I guess whatever you want to call it, development phase. But when the PlayStation 1 core was still in development, I was updating mine to see what the progress was like. And, some games would crash, some games would have, uh, issues with them, to whether it was audio or visual or just performance based. But the Nintendo 64 one's pretty cool because they thought that the D10 Nano, which is the product itself, the board itself, topped out at PlayStation 1 and Saturn. No one thought Nintendo 64 was possible. So
So up until
it's
this
pretty
point,
cool
only emulation's been done for N64.
and done really well. So yeah, really, really well. So it was always going to be a challenge to sort of meet that on a product that or a system that people didn't think was actually possible in the first place.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just trying to. So you might have to dumb it down for me. So I'm just trying to understand. I get the idea of the FPGA and the Mister, but what I can't wrap my head around is that you can use it to run multiple. I don't want to use the word emulate, but you can use it to mimic multiple consoles without
Yeah,
actually physically changing anything in there.
yeah. I mean, think of it like a menu where it says like which console do you want to
Okay, yep.
choose, because that's what it boots up to. And then once you load into that one, then obviously you've got settings that are within that core. So if you want to have certain image filters, palettes, and that sort of thing, you can do that. Where how you configure whatever peripherals you want to feed into the Mister. So I use a Neo Geo AES stick to play
Yeah.
games on, and then if I want to play SNES, I'll plug in a SNES pad for it, that sort of thing. All of that is all individual to the core that you're doing. And then I guess navigation from the main menu, most people will use, because I had a desk set up previously, whereas now I've got lounge room where my Mister, if I get it out, is going to get connected to my flat panel.
So
I'll
if
use
you've
a little
got
Bluetooth keyboard.
so if you've got enough room on your SD card, you can put as many systems as you want on there.
So the SD card runs I guess the operating system, and then you set it up where you can run it to an external hard drive. So I've got a 2 terabyte hard drive that sits plugged into the Mister, and that's where all the games are actually on.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about games, I'm talking about the consoles. So you can just put whatever you want on there. There's no limitations on, this can only sort of handle two or three things. It's just
You know,
whatever you want. You just plug it
yeah,
in.
because you're not booting into all of them or more than one at any given
Okay.
time.
Yeah, see, I thought I was under the assumption that it was custom built, as in physically with the chips and the circuitry to be a NES or a Super Nintendo or an arcade, and then if you wanted to add more, you'd have to either buy another one or add another chip or something. But it's nothing like that.
No, it's a Swiss Army knife, John. So
Yeah,
it's
okay.
really, the image itself, the Mister itself is, here's everything that it supports. So here you go. I guess if you wanted to chop things out and have a leaner system, so I guess there's people that put Misters into arcade cabinets. They might have a different image put on theirs where it's only certain arcade games because they don't want to put console games and play them through an arcade setup. I guess it varies, but for the person that wants the burger with the lot, the image that they're going to get has everything because it's an open source project. So if everything's available at any given time, then most people are going to take advantage of that.
What'd you pay for that? What are they worth these days?
Oh, they've gone up. So it depends on the actual D10 itself. And there's plenty of videos that set out, the whole process where you can buy one ready-made or you can do it yourself, similar to how people do Raspberry Pi setups with the different hats and builds and things like that. But it's really a combination of the D10 Nano to start with. You're going to need a RAM module for it. So generally people get 128 for that. You need a USB hub for it because if you wanted to stick different things into it, then obviously a hub's got to be there for it too. It'll need to have like a Wi-Fi Bluetooth module for it, so that's where the USB hub comes from. So you'll have a little, those little thumb ones for it.
Yep.
And then obviously whatever controllers you want. And if you want to stick it in a fancy case, some of the boards have fans on them because obviously you need to be mindful of cooling for it as well. So it almost becomes like a sandwich of sorts where you're sort of stacking things on top of each other. And there's, fancy cases out there. There's ones that, are clear and the lights flash and it gives a bit of a disco vibe. It really depends on the aesthetic you're going for. But I think the packages now are up over $1,000, whereas they were much less when I got mine a few years ago.
That's insane, $1,000. But I can see why from everything you've just listed off there. I'm like, yeah, this is going to start adding up very quickly.
I mean, for Neo Geo and arcade alone, like you look at what Neo Geo stuff goes
that's
for.
worth it just for those two.
Yeah, a single PCB for like a sought after game is over $1,000.
Exactly.
But for someone's and again, that's something that could fail at any given time, and being able to play arcade PCBs at home requires a bunch of other products to be able to push that image to your TV, so you're having to pay for that as well. So I guess it's caused me to really thin out a lot of my retro collection a lot. And just the ease of use, if you've got people that want to jump between this game or that game and they're two different systems, you're doing it all without having to go, let me just get down on my hands and knees and pull this cable out and pull that cable out and find this cartridge or drag this out of this drawer and everything like that. It's just a cleaner setup.
I can really see the appeal and the draw of something like a Mister or even just an EverDrive, but I'm stubbornly sticking to my guns, and I'm only doing physical games. And not that I have anything against emulation. Like, emulation's great. I love it. I used to do heaps of emulating, and especially for DOS games. But I worry that if I have something like that, then it's just going to be thrown in the drawer, and then I'll never touch it again, because it'll be like the Netflix thing. You know, you just got way too much choice and way too much too many options, and then you just go, oh, I'll just go to bed. Well, I'll just go on TikTok or something. You know?
Yeah, no, you spot on, except for the TikTok reference. I'm very much to that degree.
I don't have TikTok. I've got Instagram.
Yeah,
But it's the same thing. It's the same. They're all TikToks. It's the same thing.
Sounds like a bit of backpedaling there, but I think we'll leave that for the listeners to decide. But I think it really depends. Like, you know, if I'm sitting down to play something, I've normally got an idea of what I want to play. And that may be because I've seen a YouTube video where it's like, you know, unknown gems, or, you know, I watched one recently that was sort of horror themed games on the Mega Drive, and you're like, oh, well, there's a few there that I haven't played, or I've only sort of seen people play. I'd like to play myself. So you go there and you play it. But you're right, it becomes overwhelming very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. And I mean, anyone that uses PC emulation for, you know, anything from the 8 and 16-bit era can probably attest to that. And the other thing that I forgot to mention with the Mister is you've got things like save states. So to be able to, you're more likely to want to play a game through to completion if you're not having to
save it.
Not have to redo a level every time you die. So so that's certainly been my experience. But for me, it's just the chucking on like an arcade beat 'em up that might take 20 to 30 minutes to play through, and has great music, looks phenomenal, whether it's on a CRT or on a flat panel. I'm using an original arcade stick to play it. There's no lag. It's, it's just, there's something really nice and convenient about that. And then it all just gets packed up into a drawer at the end of it, and I don't have to worry about cartridges wearing and contact points wearing, or in the case of you being a big PS1 fan, optical drives failing or CDs being scratched and all that sort of thing.
I never had that happen to me so far.
Maybe I've jinxed you.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll come around, who knows. So yeah, well, look, I reckon we've probably covered just about everything we want to talk about in terms of CRTs and this topic.
Yeah, I think we've done pretty well.
Yeah, I think anything you want to add, or?
No, I think we had we exchanged a couple of messages about how we wanted to go about this, but I think it's pretty much been free range as far as the discussion goes, which I think is probably the best way to approach it. It's just one of those hobbies, John, where it's niche, but at the same time, it's super easy to go deep into if it's something that grabs you.
Yeah.
So I think in the same way that I've had to be quite reserved into the level of detail, and I guess you've stopped me a few times because you've had you've sort of seen that potentially occurring. I guess if there's any sort of closing comments, it's just pick up whatever you can and see if it's for you. One thing I did mention is that the speakers on CRTs, when they are stereo speakers, are really good in most decent sets, and you are going to notice the difference between that and flat panels, and I guess that's why people who own flat panels generally get a soundbar for them, because the speakers are pretty average. So you do tend to notice that. I mean, there's some great Sony sets that have big subwoofers built into the back of them on top of the stereo speakers.
I think I've got one.
They're ugly as. I know it's a beauty in the eye of the beholder thing, but I think they're ugly.
No, I don't. No, I didn't. No, I don't have one. Sorry, I had an old one that was not a Sony. Definitely not.
Yeah, you'd know if you had one because it's got a massive rear end to it. But if anyone is either listening to this because they're already into the hobby and they enjoy it, they can probably resonate with some of the things you and I have touched on very briefly. If it's someone that is listening to this that is unsure about it because there's things they've been told, if there's a cheap set you can pick up and you've got the right consoles to throw into it to see how it looks, give it a go and see if it's for you. It may scratch that itch, or it may be something that you end up sticking back on Marketplace and then someone starts their journey with what you're selling. You just never know.
So for me, as I said, I've got a couple of Trinitrons in the garage that have just been sitting there until I have time to sort through them, but I just want probably a 34 centimeter consumer set that's in decent nick. It's still got a bit of life left, and it's just small enough to sit on my desk. I'm not going to go down the PVM rabbit hole unless one by fluke happens to pop up extremely cheap, and that's why sometimes I send you a link and say, hey, check this out, and you go, nah, it's fucking shit.
No, I think I'm a bit more eloquently spoken than that, but basically I'll set out the reasons. And the thing with PVMs is that it's quite incestuous, so you can generally tell where one has come from or if someone else has owned it for a period of time. And if anyone's out there and they are looking to get their first PVM or BVM, like ask them, like, where did you get it? Where did it come from? Because these are professional use machines. They've all got stories behind them. So I bought it from a previous Optus tech, or like my story with the one that I acquired from the guy who knew the studio that was using it for marketing purposes and stuff like that. They've all got stories behind them, and often that's the most interesting part of acquiring it. Not, I bought it from JB Hi-Fi or Brash's in the early '90s or something like that, which a consumer set would ordinarily have a story like that behind it.
Oh, well, there you have it. Well, why don't you give us an idea of any recent pickups you've got?
Okay.
Back to general gaming now.
Yeah, I'm currently playing Red Dead Redemption on the Nintendo Switch. I know that was a bit of a controversial one because it wasn't really a what do you want to call it, remaster or anything like that. Yeah, but look, it runs in 1080 when it's docked, and it looks great. Like, it looks great.
That's okay.
And even it runs at 30 FPS. And it runs at 720p at handheld, and I think that looks great enough on an OLED screen at that size. So that's been quite enjoyable. Picked up.
And did you say it only runs at 30?
Yeah, it only runs at 30.
Even in docks, yeah.
That's
what you expect from the Switch, I guess.
Yeah, and again, like, it'd be nice to have, but it wasn't enough of a deal breaker for me to do it. I do dabble in a bit of PC gaming, so I've got a 4-player campaign of Baldur's Gate 3 that I've got with 3 other mates that are big into the game, but that's a once every 3 or 4 weeks when we've got time on a Friday night or a Saturday night to do it, because we've all got different competing priorities in life.
That's game of the year contender, I hear.
I haven't heard anyone that said a bad thing about it.
Yeah, okay.
At all. Like, that's I think everyone that's played it has enjoyed it, even if they're not into that sort of deep RPG mechanic, turn-based sort of shenanigans. But it's just the production quality. I think that's enough to really blow anyone away, to say that's what modern gaming actually looks like when it's done proper, and it's the subject matter is well respected, and they take their time with the development of it. It has all the boxes ticked where they should be. What about yourself, John?
Well, I got so I've been playing Blasphemous on the Switch. So I've come back to that because it has the DLC, which I never played originally. But the DLC locks you out unless you follow specific events in the game, and if you don't do it in the right order, then you have to sort of start a new game and do it that way. So I've been playing Blasphemous 1. I've got Blasphemous 2 that's just come from PlayAsia, so that's ready to go as soon as I finish the first one. And today I got Getsu Fumiden on the Switch. You've heard of that, yeah?
I had that. I traded it in. I didn't like it.
You didn't like it?
No, it just wasn't. The mechanics just didn't click for me. Maybe I was too impatient with it, but no.
The art style is what sold it for me. So I don't know anything about it other than it's a rogue. They're calling it a Roguevania. So I don't know, they're coming up with all these bloody hybrid genres now. So yeah, so I'll give that a crack at some point. But yeah, mainly because it was Konami and the art style looks really nice.
It's good to hear some good Konami news that everyone's going after them for the Metal Gear Solid collection that's just come out.
What's the go for that? Is that no good or?
Oh, it's just that they haven't really done anything with it. They've just slapped the MSX ones on the actual cartridge, and everything else you have to download.
Oh, really?
No.
Yeah, that'll be right.
For the Switch, at least.
And the last thing that I downloaded a game called on the Switch. It's called The Master's Pupil. You may have seen like a Facebook ad or an Instagram ad about it. So essentially what it is, this guy, this Aussie bloke, this Aussie developer, he hand painted a video game by hand, like with fucking paint, not on a stylus or anything. And it took him 7 years to develop. And it's just a basic, puzzle platformer, but it's done in the style of Monet.
Yeah.
Monet. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So like when I saw that, I thought, geez, that's really interesting. So I downloaded it, and I've just been playing through it the last couple of days, and yeah, it's all right. It's pretty good. It's not, it's not action packed or anything like that. It's literally just a puzzle platformer with a bit of a twist and a bit of a unique style. So, I thought that was pretty interesting.
I think sort of the Limbos and the Little Nightmares of the world sort of set the market for that. That showed that there was a lot of interest, even for casual gamers, to play those platformers that had a bit of puzzle element to them and weren't just Twitch skill based and what your reaction times were, like your Marios and
we've got enough of those. Limbo came out quite a while ago. That was PS3 days actually.
Yeah, I got it on Xbox 360 when it was whatever that promotion they'd run, seasonal, spring games for blah 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 and that sort of thing. And then that's been I think we could do a whole episode on games that are easy to recommend for people, even if they don't play video games. Limbo would definitely be right up there. I think that.
Yeah, it gets hard though towards the end.
I ended up recommending that to some people that didn't have a games console and got it for iOS and played it on their iPhones.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And
it's on iPhone.
It translates really well to that. As well. So,
that's definitely probably that is, I reckon, definitely a contender for games for casual or non-gamers even.
Yeah.
Did you play
going off on tangents?
Did you play the sequel? Not a sequel. It had a spiritual successor called Inside.
So Inside, great game.
That was good.
And then I think if you're wanting something a little bit more involved, that's where the Little Nightmares series comes into play.
Yeah, that's one I haven't looked into much.
Yeah, they're great games as well. So again, easy to pick up enough because it's visually engaging and the actual movement's quite simple. And then once you get the hang of it, then that's where the spike happens, and then people will either get through it and really enjoy it, or say it was too hard and too scary and not for me. So yeah, good games, good series for those that haven't. Just good with how long they've been around for.
Yeah, it's been a while. Getting old. All right. Well, I think that might just about wrap us up. So
thanks for having me on, John. It was a good topic to cover.
It really was. You definitely have a breadth of knowledge. Are you sure you don't have a PhD or at least an undergrad in
Can we not end the podcast on that note? Because I have to again reiterate that I'm in no way an expert. I thought I'd jump on because it's a thing that I enjoy talking about, and I think it's not something that is hard to get into, and it will, for the right, I guess, people that right persons or people that are into retro gaming, I think it will enrich your experience if you do want to have a crack at grabbing a CRT and firing some of your consoles into it and seeing how it goes. Or you might end up just going down to a store or jumping on eBay or AliExpress and buying one of those cheap feed analog into it and pump out HDMI, get your fix, and then pack your consoles away after that and never touch them again.
If you're going to do that, just get a mini console. I think you're better off.
Yeah, or buy a Mister as well if you want to throw money at it.
I think I might get the PS5 Slim before I get one of those.
God, isn't that the one that we're going off on tangents? Yeah, that's the one that has an external hard drive, doesn't it?
External disk drive.
Disk drive, sorry. Disk drive. Yeah, ridiculous. All right,
it's strange, but anyway,
that's another episode. Weird marketing and development choices. But anyway, but thanks for having me on, John. It's been a pleasure.
No, I appreciate it, Paul. Thank you very much. Do you have an Instagram? Do you have any socials you want to plug or anything like that, or?
Absolutely not. And I very much like it that way. So
fantastic. I totally agree. Anyway, let me recommend my socials. So you can follow me. You can follow the pod on Instagram, semi.occasional.pod, or on Twitter, semi-occasional-pod. You can follow me on Instagram, retro prawns. And hey, if you're listening to this on Spotify, you could leave us a review or a rating. That would be much, much appreciated and would really help the show. And same on Apple Podcasts. If you could leave a review, preferably 5 stars. I'll take 4 though. And don't forget to check us out on OnlyFans. You might be surprised. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thanks, Paul, for joining, and hope to have you again sometime.
Thanks, John.
Cheers, mate. See ya.
Goodbye.